When the tale of Lisa and David Martin began, it seemed like a love story for the ages. They had met in college, a serendipitous encounter at a campus art exhibition. Lisa, an art history major with a passion for painting, was showcasing her latest piece, a vivid, abstract portrayal of a bustling cityscape. David, a finance major with a knack for numbers, had been dragged to the event by a friend. Initially reluctant but soon captivated by both the artwork and the artist herself. Their connection was instantaneous and electric, a spark that quickly ignited into a deep and abiding love. Lisa's creativity and spontaneity perfectly complemented David's analytical and methodical nature, creating a harmonious balance that enriched both their lives. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic dates, late-night conversations, and shared dreams. They spent weekends exploring art galleries, hiking through scenic trails, and experimenting with new recipes in the kitchen. David was the steady, reliable anchor in Lisa's life, providing the stability she had always yearned for. In return, Lisa brought color and excitement into David's world, encouraging him to embrace life's uncertainties and explore his more creative side. They fell in love almost instantly, their chemistry undeniable, and soon after graduating, they tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony that left their friends and family in awe. The wedding was a testament to their love, a picturesque event held in a sun-dappled garden, filled with laughter, tears of joy, and heartfelt vows that promised a lifetime of partnership and devotion. For years, they were the couple everyone aspired to be. David's career in finance took off, landing him a lucrative position at a prestigious firm, where he quickly rose through the ranks due to his sharp intellect and unwavering work ethic. He became known as a financial wizard, someone who could turn any investment into gold, and his reputation brought them both financial stability and social acclaim. Lisa, meanwhile, continued to pursue her passion for art. Her work began to gain recognition, with her pieces being showcased in local galleries and eventually attracting the attention of influential critics. Her vibrant paintings, often inspired by their travels and shared experiences, were celebrated for their emotional depth and unique perspective. Together, they bought a charming house in the suburbs, complete with a white picket fence and a well-tended garden that David meticulously cared for on weekends. But beneath the veneer of their seemingly idyllic life, cracks were beginning to show. David was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma shortly after their 10th anniversary, a brutal twist of fate that neither of them saw coming. The news hit them like a freight train, shattering the carefully constructed world they had built. David, always the strong and dependable one, was suddenly vulnerable, his once robust health deteriorating rapidly. The initial shock gave way to a relentless cycle of medical appointments, treatments, and hospital visits. The chemotherapy treatments were brutal, draining David of his energy and vitality. He became a shell of his former self, spending most of his days confined to their home, too weak to do much of anything. The man who had once been the rock of their relationship now needed constant care, a role reversal that was both heartbreaking and exhausting. Lisa, on the other hand, felt suffocated by the constant reminders of sickness and mortality that had invaded their lives. The adventurous, vivacious spirit who had always brought light into their home now found herself trapped in a never-ending cycle of doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and hospital visits. She tried to be supportive, attending every medical appointment, cooking nutritious meals, and ensuring David took his medication on time. But her heart wasn't in it. The vibrant woman who once thrived on excitement and spontaneity now felt her world narrowing, reduced to the grim reality of caregiving. She longed for the excitement and freedom they'd once shared, for the days when they were partners in adventure, not in suffering. The weight of her new responsibilities, coupled with the constant fear of losing David, began to take a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. As David's condition worsened, the emotional distance between them grew. Lisa felt increasingly isolated, her life consumed by the demands of caregiving and the unrelenting stress of watching her husband suffer. Their once vibrant home became a place of sorrow and fatigue, the laughter and joy replaced by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the sterile scent of antiseptics. Lisa's art began to suffer as well. Her once lively and colorful paintings grew darker and more somber, reflecting the turmoil inside her. She found herself yearning for an escape, a way to reclaim some semblance of the life she once knew. The turning point came when Lisa reconnected with an old college friend on social media. His name was Mark, and their paths had crossed frequently during their university days. Back then, Mark had been a charming and reckless photography major, always the life of the party, with an eye for beauty and a knack for capturing moments that seemed to elude everyone else. He was the kind of guy who lived in the moment, never worrying too much about the future, a stark contrast to David's meticulous planning and careful consideration of every decision. Lisa and Mark had shared a few classes and a lot of late-night conversations over coffee, discussing everything from art to philosophy to their wildest dreams. There had always been a spark between them, an unspoken chemistry that had never been acted upon, partly because Lisa had been so deeply committed to David. Years later, as Lisa scrolled through her social media feed, she stumbled upon Mark's profile. He was still living in Miami, where he had moved shortly after graduation to pursue his photography career. His posts were a vibrant tapestry of beach scenes, glamorous nightlife, and beautiful people, a world away from the sterile hospital rooms and the somber mood of her current life. They exchanged a few casual messages, catching up on the intervening years. Mark's life seemed to be one of continuous adventure, filled with exotic travels and artistic triumphs. His carefree attitude and zest for life were intoxicating to Lisa, a sharp contrast to the drudgery and despair she faced daily. Their conversations quickly became a lifeline for Lisa, a window into a world that still held excitement and possibility. She found herself eagerly anticipating their chats, staying up late into the night to exchange messages and share stories. Mark's enthusiasm was contagious, and he reminded Lisa of the person she had once been, the adventurous, passionate woman who believed in living life to the fullest. It wasn't long before Mark suggested she visit him in Miami. The idea was tantalizing, a siren call she found impossible to resist. He painted a picture of endless sunny days, art galleries, beach parties, and a break from the relentless stress of her life. And then our heroine hatched an incredibly insidious plan. She knew she couldn't just leave David alone in his condition, but the thought of escaping, even for a little while, was too tempting. She justified it to herself as a much-needed break, a way to recharge so she could return to David with renewed energy and positivity. And she most likely understood perfectly well how such a journey could end. Something very sweet on the one hand, and quite bitter on the other. With a mix of guilt and excitement, Lisa began to plan the trip meticulously. She arranged for David's chemotherapy sessions to be administered in Miami, something she convinced herself was a necessary convenience. She consulted with his doctors, presenting it as a way for David to receive treatment while enjoying a change of scenery. Surprisingly, they agreed, perhaps persuaded by her earnestness and the appeal of a sunny climate for recuperation. Lisa hired a nurse to accompany them, someone who could provide professional care for David, ensuring he took his medication and attended his appointments. She also booked a luxurious suite at a hotel with easy access to a top-notch medical facility, selling the idea to herself as a compromise. She could be there for David while also taking a break from their dreary routine. When the day finally came, Lisa felt a strange mix of emotions as they boarded the plane. David was weak, but hopeful, buying into the idea that the trip might somehow improve his spirits. He didn't know the real reason behind Lisa's sudden desire to take him to Miami, and she was careful to keep it that way. Upon arrival, the warm, salty air and the vibrant energy of the city were intoxicating. Miami's beauty and vitality were a stark contrast to the dreary, monotonous days back home, and Lisa felt a weight lift from her shoulders almost instantly. The nurse took over David's care, following the meticulous schedule Lisa had arranged. David spent most of his time resting in the hotel suite, receiving his treatments and trying to regain some strength. Lisa, meanwhile, reconnected with Mark. He was just as she remembered, handsome, carefree, and full of life. They hugged at their first meeting, a lingering embrace that stirred something deep inside Lisa. It was as if the years had melted away, and they were back in college, full of dreams and unspoken desires. Mark took her to all the hot spots, introducing her to his glamorous friends, taking her to exclusive parties, and showing her the hidden gems of the city. They laughed, danced, and drank like there was no tomorrow. Lisa felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. She could almost forget about the life she had left behind, about the husband who was fighting for his life. Their conversations, once again, flowed effortlessly, filled with shared memories and new experiences. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and the boundaries Lisa had once respected began to blur. One night, after a particularly exhilarating party on a private yacht, Lisa and Mark found themselves alone on the beach, the moon casting a silver glow over the waves. They walked along the shore, their feet sinking into the cool sand, the sound of the ocean a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Mark stopped, turning to face her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Without a word, he leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was both familiar and thrillingly new. Lisa didn't resist. Instead, she surrendered to the moment, to the passion she had suppressed for so long. They spent the night together, their reunion culminating in an intense and passionate encounter that left Lisa feeling both exhilarated and deeply conflicted. She had betrayed David in the most profound way, yet she couldn't deny the powerful emotions that had driven her actions. The next morning, as she returned to the hotel, guilt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the fleeting happiness she had found. One day, David had to undergo an incredibly difficult chemotherapy session. It was one of those grueling treatments that left him feeling as if his body was being attacked from the inside out. The doctors had warned him that this session would be particularly tough, designed to aggressively target the cancer cells, but also likely to bring about severe side effects. The morning of the treatment, David felt a knot of dread in his stomach. He knew it was going to be a long, painful day, but he tried to muster some hope, believing that each session was a step closer to remission. Lisa, who had been by his side through all the previous treatments, seemed distracted that morning. She fussed over his breakfast, her movements hurried and disjointed. When David asked her if everything was all right, she forced a smile and assured him it was just work stress. Her gallery back home had been demanding more of her time lately, or so she said. David believed her, never suspecting the real reason behind her anxiety. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Lisa received a call on her cell phone. She stepped into another room to take it, her voice low and hurried. When she returned, she had a troubled look on her face. "David, I just got an urgent call from the gallery," she said, her voice tinged with feigned frustration. "They need me to handle an issue with one of the exhibitions. I have to take care of this. It can't wait." David, already feeling the weight of the upcoming treatment, nodded understandingly. "It's okay, Lisa," he said, his voice weak but reassuring. "You should go. I'll be fine with the nurse." Lisa kissed him on the forehead, her touch lingering just long enough to convey a semblance of sincerity. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised. Then, with a hurried wave, she was out the door, her mind already drifting to the plans she had made with Mark. As soon as she was clear of the hospital, Lisa's demeanor changed. She felt a surge of excitement as she texted Mark to confirm their rendezvous. Within an hour, she was at his luxurious penthouse, a world away from the sterile hospital and the painful reality of David's treatment. Mark greeted her with a broad smile and a glass of champagne. "Welcome back to paradise," he said, pulling her into a deep kiss. Lisa melted into his arms, the guilt momentarily forgotten as they lost themselves in the passion that had become their secret escape. Back at the hospital, David was struggling. The chemotherapy was as brutal as the doctors had warned. Within hours, he was nauseous, disoriented, and in excruciating pain. The nurse, sensing something was wrong, tried to keep him comfortable, but David's condition continued to deteriorate rapidly. He called out for Lisa, his voice a faint whisper amidst the beeping of medical machines and the murmur of concerned nurses. But Lisa wasn't there. She was miles away, wrapped in the luxurious embrace of Mark's world, oblivious to the agony her husband was enduring. The afternoon turned into a haze of pain and confusion for David. He experienced a sudden spike in his fever, his body convulsing with chills. His vision blurred, and he felt a deep, throbbing ache in his bones. The nurses worked tirelessly to stabilize him, administering medication and monitoring his vitals, but the absence of his wife left a void that no amount of medical care could fill. David felt alone, abandoned at his most vulnerable moment. Meanwhile, Lisa and Mark lounged by the pool at his estate, sipping cocktails and laughing. Mark, with his easy charm and affluence, made Lisa forget about the responsibility she had left behind. They talked about old times, shared stories, and indulged in each other's company, their attraction as strong as ever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they moved inside, their bodies entwined in a dance of passion that had become their escape from reality. Hours later, as Lisa lay in Mark's arms, her phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages. She ignored it, not wanting anything to disrupt the bubble of pleasure she was in. It wasn't until much later, when the reality of her deceit began to creep back in, that she reluctantly checked her phone. Panic gripped her as she saw the messages from the hospital, the missed calls from the nurse, the urgent texts detailing David's sudden decline. Frantic, Lisa hurriedly dressed and made excuses to Mark about needing to return to David. Mark, ever the understanding and charming rogue, kissed her goodbye with a promise of seeing her soon. Lisa sped back to the hospital, her heart pounding not just from the speed, but from the overwhelming guilt that now threatened to suffocate her. She could barely breathe as she rushed through the hospital corridors, the bright fluorescent lights making everything seem harsh and unforgiving. When she finally reached David's room, she found him pale and weak, his body exhausted from the ordeal. He looked at her with weary eyes, filled with a mix of pain and disappointment. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lisa's heart shattered at the sight of him. She wanted to lie, to say something that would make it all better, but the truth was too glaring to ignore. "I'm so sorry, David," she said, tears streaming down her face. "There was an emergency at the gallery. I came as soon as I could." David nodded slightly, too weak to argue, but the look in his eyes told her he knew something was amiss. He didn't have the strength to question her further, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Lisa spent the night by his side, holding his hand, trying to make up for her absence with whispered apologies and promises she wasn't sure she could keep. In the quiet of the hospital room, with the beeping machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic, Lisa felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She had betrayed the man who needed her most, choosing her own desires over his well-being. As she watched David struggle to breathe, she wondered if she could ever truly make amends, or if the chasm she had created between them was too vast to bridge. One evening, as Lisa returned to the hotel after a particularly draining day at the hospital, she felt the weight of her secrets pressing down on her more heavily than ever. David had been more subdued lately, his strength waning, and the toll of his illness was becoming increasingly apparent. Lisa went through the motions of their nightly routine, helping him with his medication and making sure he was comfortable before heading to the shower. As the water cascaded over her, Lisa tried to wash away the guilt and anxiety that clung to her. She knew she had to stay strong for David, but the constant vigilance and the fear of discovery were wearing her down. In her haste, she had forgotten to turn on Do Not Disturb mode on her phone, which she had left on the bedside table. David, lying in bed and unable to sleep, heard the phone buzz. At first he did not pay attention to these messages. Lisa often received a lot of messages, and she often forgot to turn off the messages, so he was already used to it. But at one moment the vibration from the phone threw it to the floor. Apparently Lisa put it completely on the edge of the table. With some hurt, he tried to reach over and picked it up, a simple action that would change everything. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "You was insane today, babe. Your body, your smell. I wish we could repeat it." David stared at the message, his mind racing. He had suspected something was off, especially with the sudden gallery emergency and Lisa's increasingly frequent absences. But seeing the message made it real, and the pieces began to fall into place. He scrolled through her phone, finding more messages and call logs that confirmed his worst fears. When Lisa emerged from the shower, she found David sitting up in bed, her phone in his hand. The look on his face was one of calm determination, a stark contrast to the turmoil she felt inside. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "David," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I saw the messages, Lisa," he said quietly. "I know about Mark." Tears sprang to her eyes as she rushed to his side. "David, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I was overwhelmed. I made a mistake." David's expression remained unchanged, his eyes cold and distant. "You were overwhelmed, so you decided to cheat on me while I'm fighting for my life. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Lisa collapsed into a chair beside the bed, her body racked with sobs. "I'm so sorry, David. I know I hurt you, and I can't take it back. I was selfish and stupid, but I love you. I've always loved you." David took a deep breath, the pain in his eyes cutting through Lisa like a knife. "I believe you loved me, Lisa. Maybe you still do in some way. But love isn't just about feelings. It's about actions and choices, and you chose to betray me." Lisa reached out to take his hand, but he pulled away. "David, please, give me a chance to make it right. I'll do anything." David shook his head slowly. "There's nothing you can do to undo this, Lisa. The trust between us is shattered, and without trust, there's no foundation for our marriage. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've decided to file for divorce." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "No, David, please don't do this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can get through this. We can go to counseling, we can." David cut her off again, his voice calm but resolute. "Lisa, this isn't just about your affair. It's about the fundamental breach of trust and respect. I need someone who will stand by me, not run off with another man when things get tough." Lisa sobbed uncontrollably, but David remained unmoved. "I understand why you did what you did," he said. "You were scared, overwhelmed, and you wanted to escape. But understanding doesn't mean I can accept it. I made a mistake in thinking you were the right person for me. I see that now." Lisa pleaded with him, begging for another chance, but David had made up his mind. He called his lawyer the next day, initiating the divorce proceedings. He arranged for the nurse to stay on with him, ensuring he would have the care he needed as he continued his fight against cancer. Lisa, devastated and broken, watched as the life she had known crumbled around her. She moved out of the hotel, finding a small apartment where she could sort through the wreckage of her choices. The reality of her actions weighed heavily on her, and she knew she had lost the one person who had always believed in her, even in her darkest moments. David, though heartbroken, found a new sense of resolve. He focused on his treatment, determined to fight not just for his life, but for a future where he could find peace and perhaps, someday, love again with someone who truly valued and respected him. In the days following their confrontation, Lisa disappeared from David's life. It was not particularly known where she went. Some speculated she had returned to her parents' home, seeking solace and support. Others whispered that she had run back to Mark, the rich lover whose promises of escape had once lured her away from her responsibilities. Regardless of her destination, Lisa's absence left a void that David chose to fill with determination and resolve. David's journey through chemotherapy continued, each session a grueling battle against the cancer that sought to consume him. The nurses and doctors of the hospital became his new support system, their unwavering dedication bolstering his spirit. His sister Susan visited often, Her protective nature now focused entirely on helping her brother through this difficult time. Despite the emotional turmoil and physical exhaustion, David fought with everything he had. He immersed himself in research about his illness, learning about new treatments and therapies. He adhered strictly to the regimen prescribed by his oncologists, never missing a dose of medication or a follow-up appointment. His once cheerful demeanor became steely and determined as he channeled all his energy into his recovery. Months passed, and the small victories began to accumulate. The tumors shrank, his strength gradually returned, and the dark shadows under his eyes began to fade. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks and complications, moments when he felt the crushing weight of despair. But through it all, David held on to the hope that he could reclaim his life. One bright morning, David sat in his oncologist's office, waiting for the results of his latest scans. The doctor entered, a slight smile on his face, and David felt a glimmer of hope. "David," the doctor began, "I have some good news. Your cancer is in remission." The words hung in the air, almost surreal. David had imagined this moment countless times, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a dream. "Remission," he repeated, savoring the word. It wasn't a cure, but it was a significant milestone in his fight. One day, several months after David had reached remission, he received an unexpected message on his phone. It was from Lisa. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words on the screen. "Hey David, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you a lot. How are you?" David stared at the message for a long moment. Memories of their time together flooded back, both the good and the bad. He remembered the days when Lisa had been his rock, standing by him through the early stages of his illness. But he also remembered the betrayal, the pain of discovering her infidelity while he was fighting for his life. He felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to respond, to tell her how he was doing and hear about her life. But the other part, the part that had grown stronger and more resilient, knew that opening that door would only lead to more heartache. Lisa had made her choices, and he had made his. He had moved on, focused on his recovery and his future. Without a second thought, David tapped on the message, selected the option to block her number, and confirmed it. He watched as the screen returned to his list of messages, Lisa's name now absent. He set the phone down, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Blocking Lisa was more than just a practical action. It was a symbolic one. It was his way of saying goodbye to the past and affirming his commitment to his new life. David had no room for the shadows of betrayal and regret. He needed only the light of hope and the strength of his own resilience. That evening, as David sat on his balcony, watching the sunset, he felt a sense of peace. He had made the right decision. Lisa's chapter in his life was closed, and he was free to write new ones, filled with hope, growth, and the unwavering determination to live fully and authentically.